Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question.
Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?
Jesus replied,
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments.
While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them,
What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?
The son of David.
They replied. He said to them,
How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says, The Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If then David calls him Lord, how can he be his son?
No one could say a word in reply, and from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions.
May I first thank you all for the messages, cards and prayers and other outpourings of love following Sue's need to go into hospital for a while. It is very much appreciated and we are humbled that you care so much. Thank you. Well, now back to the Gospel passage. The action's taking place sometime between Palm Sunday and Good Friday, and probably in a part of the temple where there were a set of columns. And this is where many people used to sit, to teach, and to listen. And Jesus appears to be coming to the temple each day and teaching. And there are groups coming to try and catch him out. First we had the Pharisees with a question about paying taxes to Rome. And then the Sadducees come with the story of a woman who married several times and seemingly outlived a whole family. And Jesus dealt with these questions effectively. Now the Pharisees are back with the question, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Well, it's easy to suspect that their idea is that everyone has their favourite commandment. And if Jesus doesn't pick theirs, then he will be diminished in their eyes. And with 10 to choose from, the odds are that he will do that to 90% of his hearers. And in addition, they can play on his failure to pick whatever they thought he should pick. And so Jesus responds with not one of the 10, but a well-known saying known as the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. Well, let's focus on this word love. In Greek, this is an imperative, an order, an instruction to love. But how can this be? There's a problem with this. I mean, how can you order someone to love? Do you remember when you first fell in love? You see the person in question, Cupid draws back his bow and kapow! You are head over heels in love with this person. It's not something under our control, it's something that happens to us. So how can Jesus be instructing us to do something we have no control over? Well, at this moment, we have to remember that the words are slippery customers, as they have a habit of changing their meaning. For example, fear, charity, and wicked are all words that have changed or are changing their meaning over the years. And love is a particularly slippery word. Imagine this scene. A young man is with his sweetheart on the sofa. He leans over to her and says, "I love you." And she replies, "I'd love a cup of coffee." Clearly the word love in these phrases doesn't have the same meaning. We use the word love in English to stretch from the deepest emotion of desire through to a simple wish for a cup of coffee. Well, the Greeks weren't so daft, and they had several words for love, ranging from one that means this deep love, to another that describes family love, to yet another that means lust. And then there is the one used nearly exclusively in the New Testament, which is agape. This means a caring, concerned love. Well, it used to be translated charity, and it could be translated today as loving kindness. Can you see the difference? You don't choose to fall into romantic love. Cupid's arrow hits you, and that's it. You don't choose to love your family. It's deep in your genes. And you don't choose to lust. You just have to fight the temptation. But you do choose to show this loving kindness, this caring love to God. This means that we're not being asked to give something we cannot give. So how do we show our love to God? Well, Jesus tells us one of the answers because he actually gives his hearers 2 commandments rather than 1. The second being, love your neighbour as yourself. And then not long after this statement, Jesus talks about sheep and goats, leading to that idea that whatever you do for someone else, you do for him. And whatever you don't do for someone else, you don't do for him. He's telling us that when you show love for others, you show love to him. Jesus also says that we show we are his disciples by the way we love one another. In other words, if we want to show people how much we love him, we do so by how much we love one another. So how do we show our love for God? Well, by our love for each other and by how we treat one another and those outside the church. When we show that love in what we do, and remember here we're talking about agape, that loving kindness, then we show that we love God. See how these Christians love one another. Well, that was said by onlookers of early Christians. Could onlookers of today say the same of us? In both cases, love for our neighbour would be an outworking of love for God in the heart. And then we show love for God more directly in our worship. Here we can express our love for God. And it's particularly here where the newer worship songs can play their part. Many of them give us the words, addressing God directly to express how much we love him. And this makes them a great vehicle for praise and adoration, especially when we often find that the hardest prayers to put into words are those of adoration. And then Jesus came up with a trick question of his own, which stopped any more questions in their tracks. Whose son is the Messiah? And this puzzles us today as to what it can be about. You see, the belief was that a son could never be greater than his father, and the question concerns King David and the Messiah. And the Jews believed that the Messiah would be a descendant of David, yet David himself refers to the Messiah, his descendant, as being greater than himself. And this was a real conundrum for the first century people. And yes, it stopped their trick questions.